I am Amy Vetter, and welcome to the Breaking Beliefs podcast. This valuable time is for you to pause in your day and go on your own self-journey. Discover the beliefs that are holding you back from living your best life at work and at home. Learn from the guests on this show as they share their inspirational stories on how they found ways to break internal beliefs that were no longer serving them. Because if you believe you can, you will. And our podcast begins now. Welcome to this episode of Breaking Beliefs. And this episode is our quarter 3 2020 in review. And first off, I want to thank all of the listeners and people that have been following this podcast for your messages and letting me know the impact that these people's stories have had for you. And it's so important to hear those things because, you know, we do these interviews and you never know who's listening on the other side or how you might be taking in some of these lessons. So I'm so grateful for those of you that have messaged me and let me know the impact this podcast has made in your lives. Also, if you feel that you are motivated to leave a review on this podcast, that's always helpful. If you leave it on Apple Podcasts or any podcast platform you listen to, that way it does surface to other listeners of podcasts and they will find this podcast as well. So that is always greatly appreciated too. This is episode 49. So we have, over the last year, had 49 different interviews and conversations that we've shared with you. And it has just been such an honor to speak to all the people that I've spoken to, but also to be able to share my thoughts as well, as it's just nice to have a platform to get those thoughts out, because this is really my purpose and passion around helping others on my own learning journey. We are all on it. We're never finished. With each new thing we learn, there is something else that opens up for us, or each new experience, whether it's been hard, whether it's a good experience, all of those experiences become the fabric of our life. I think of it like a quilt. Of each thing starts becoming something else as we add on to it. And we are that fabric. And it just is so interesting that we all have a story, that we all have things to share that's so meaningful. We can think our lives are just like anybody else's, but when you really go back and review or even write it down or have a conversation about it, you realize that each person has something to teach to somebody else, that we've all gone through life and experienced maybe the same thing, just like this pandemic, but have gone about it in different ways. And it's opened up different things for each of us, that we all have something to share. So thank you for being open to listening to these stories. And over the last quarter, it's, you know, really interesting the types of conversations that I've had on this podcast. And I really look at it as 3 key areas that have leveled up. And one has been all about purpose and vision. And each of our purpose and vision is unique to us. And many times we think about vision as a business concept, but not necessarily our own personal purpose and our own personal vision, and how important it is to really understand what that is so that we create our own roadmap. So we'll talk a little bit and review that as we had on this podcast. The other key concept that we had over this last quarter was all about supporting one another and the importance of a team. If anything, with technology dividing us in our homes or in different geographies where we haven't been able to connect together in person, it's become more and more obvious the importance of human connection and how we can support one another, and that it's very hard to survive on our own without sharing with one another. And reaching out. So that's been a key concept, as well as understanding someone else's experience. We've encountered a conversation on diversity that's been so important that has leveled up during this time. And not that this conversation wasn't happening, but I think there was just a feeling of intolerance and disgust and just readiness to make a change, which should have happened a long, long time ago. But whenever it happens, and we are at a time where it just feels that people are more open to the conversation, which is a really good place to be in, and it's a great start. And so those conversations have been really important conversations on this podcast as well. So let's go back and review a couple of these conversations that we've had in these different areas. And the first one being purpose and vision. And I interviewed Keith James from Thomson Reuters, and we had a very long conversation about mindset and how important mindset is, and really his journey of understanding that, you know, he really went about his career. It was all about winning and taking incremental steps that maybe were safe to get to the place that he wanted to be at in his career. And most of us that are achievers can totally understand how that happens. But we often, when we're in the midst of that, aren't really stepping back and pausing and understanding why we are going about our lives that way. And he was given this break in his career that it was really transformational for him. And I think a really important point about purpose and vision was that in order to make a transformation, you have to understand that it's all about you. No one can do it for you. That we can put up a lot of excuses of why something doesn't happen, maybe whatever outside circumstances we have. But in most cases, if we intentionally go about the inner work that we need to do, we can start going through that transformation process. And there really isn't a time-bound place that we can say, in 6 months, we will feel better. But what we can say is, this is the commitment I will make to myself today. I will make to myself this week, this month, in 6 months, whatever that is, and start working on those things that will help us individually, that only we can decide what that is, that no one can decide that for us. And Keith gave us a lot of different exercises that he does himself that was really helpful to understand how he developed his own emotional strength, his clarity, how he was able to shift his energy to align to the purpose that he defined for himself. And also, and I think this is really important, especially in these times where we're so stressed out with technology, or the technology walls that have been put between us, is understanding how to shift your mood. That a lot of times we go into conversations and we don't necessarily think about how we are impacting another person. And instead we leave that conversation maybe frustrated and thinking it's about them or certain circumstances that we have or stress that we have, instead of looking at what is our responsibility. And one of the things that he talked about that I think was so important was really stepping back before he walks into a meeting to understand what his mood is and what kind of practices he can do very quickly to shift his energy before he walks into that next experience, that next conversation. So really taking responsibility for ourselves, for our mindset, and how we can impact others in a very meaningful way. When I talked to Angie, it was a conversation again about purpose and vision, but from her own perspective as well, is understanding that the successes are yours, but also your challenges are those that you have to overcome yourself as well. You can't blame others for your challenges. We all have challenges. read in a book probably a year or so ago, but it was a very interesting thought about the fact that, you know, we often will ask ourselves, why did this happen to me? Why did I go through this bad experience? You know, who has something against me? But when we step back and think about, well, should it have happened to somebody else? Did we wish that upon somebody else? Why shouldn't that experience have happened to me in my life too? And understanding that the challenges that we have are life's challenges, that we each get different ones, but it's our job to overcome those challenges and figure out how to still lead a positive life and not be taken down by the challenges that we cannot control that happen in our lives. We cannot control the experiences that we may have with other people that we care about. We cannot control pandemics. We cannot control the shift in technology, all of those things. But what we can control is how we respond and how we persevere in our hardest times, which is really what creates the grit and resilience that creates the person that we are and how we impact others in a positive way. And she also talked about how to regulate energy and making sure that you're showing up with the attitude that you want to show up with. That a lot of times that we don't understand how contagious our energy can be. So when we have negative energy, it's contagious to the other person and starts affecting their energy, and we can start feeling it build up even if we're not doing it intentionally. So walking through life intentionally is a whole nother path to walk, because we have to seriously think about what is that energy we're trying to create and not just let whatever happen. Be really careful about how we do that. And I think another energy shift was understanding of how we need to appreciate the people around us as well. And this really kind of moves into supporting one another, is that it's really important that we thank the people around us. And it can be such a simple thing, but it's a thing we often forget. And we might look to others for them to just notice. But if we don't allow people to understand the things that we do and be an advocate for ourselves, it's hard for people to look up from the things that they are doing to even know that. I was talking to someone the last couple of weeks and just about funerals, and how during funerals we often hear all of these wonderful things that people do, and we don't actually know that during their lifetime. And then it's such a bummer because we can't thank them for the things that they've done, or even maybe understand them in a different way that we didn't even know were things going on in their life, and how they really persevered, and conversations you could have had. So really looking up and noticing what other people are doing, and also creating space for people to tell you what they're doing, is really what this podcast is about in so many ways. It's because we don't often sit down for 30, 45 minutes, an hour, and just ask someone what their story is and what they've contributed to the world, and how they go about intentionally in their life, because there's these little things we do in our day that we don't even understand. So when Angie talked about purpose, she also talked about is really understanding the things that light a fire under you, and to not lose that if we start losing that, then we're not really living our purpose. And those are the times we need to step back and pause and think about what things do we need to shift and explore in our lives, so that we can see that it's time for a pivot. It's time for a change, so that we understand that. Now, my interview with Corliss Taylor, I think, is just such an important interview for everyone to listen to. So if you didn't hear that one, really, really important for you to go back and review. Corliss and I talked a lot about her journey. It was a great discussion on diversity and inclusion, but really came back to two of our key points that I'm highlighting for this quarter is how to support one another, but also to understand someone else's experience and how we can help. And when she talked about her story of her mom pushing her out of her comfort zone, that she wouldn't necessarily have done on her own, but because her mom kind of pushed her and said, you need to go away, you need to go to university, and don't necessarily do what's comfortable for you. But the one thing that her mom did for her that was so important was said to her, you got this. And that gave her the inner confidence of like, yeah, I do have this. I can make this happen. And so I think going back to just understanding our own strength, but the words that we use with others that are so important to give them the confidence to follow their dreams, even when it's hard. I know when my son went to college over a year ago and he was moving out, everything in my body was like, please don't go. But the words that came out were, you got this. I'm proud of you. This is the right next step. So you have to get out of the things that you want personally sometimes from someone else in order for them to expand and be able to grow in the ways that they need to grow. Even when it's the hardest thing emotionally to do, it's sometimes the right thing to do for each person and yourself, because life does go through transitions and we don't necessarily get to stay stagnant in the life that we have, that there is times for change and transition, and we can't hold other people stagnant in those areas as well, because it's time for each person to grow. So another really important concept that we talked about is the question, how can I help? So when we are in a place to support another person, it's important that we create the space to support another person. It's not just waiting for someone to come to us to get the help, that many people don't even know they need help, or create the space or have the confidence to even ask for the help. And so in these times, especially when we were talking about diversity and inclusion, it was very, very important for Corliss to be asking people, how can I help? So that not only other people that have been in minority positions can achieve the success that they want, but people that want to be more inclusive don't necessarily know how because they haven't lived that story. And so part of what we talked about was how important it is to educate yourself on both sides of an argument. And I think this is such a key thing beyond diversity and inclusion, but also in the political environment that we are in as well, is it's so divisive because we don't educate ourselves on the other side. It probably won't change your mind to educate yourself on the other side. But what it will do is create a more productive conversation. And there may be things on either side that you do agree with, that there are certain things that there are common areas where you can come together. And then there are areas that you can agree on that you won't agree to. And that's okay. That is really what our country is about, and shouldn't be that everyone has to think the same way. So it is important that when we're in a conversation, especially when we're talking about other religions, minorities, political views, anything, that sexual preferences, that we're educating ourselves on what that person's journey is, on what that person's experience is, on the facts of any argument, so that we can really truly come together and still be able to support one another, even if we don't agree. And that is something that will help move us forward if we're willing to do it. And we have to take time and dedicate time to doing that, because it isn't necessarily something we would do naturally. So creating actionable ways to do that. The other thing that she talked about that was important is that we have to prepare ourselves for the opportunity to help, so that when we're asked to serve, when we're asked to help, we're ready to, we're open to. And sometimes it's just remembering how we would respond if someone asked for the help, whatever that help may be, that opportunity is there. So you have to make yourself open and available so people feel comfortable to ask for that help. So really important takeaways there for sure. Just along the lines of diversity and inclusion, when we talk about supporting one another and understanding someone else's experience, my interview with Todd Shapiro really went deep into that because of his very unique background of, really growing up in a poor neighborhood in Chicago, understanding the experience of many different cultures because he lived it, but also understanding his own experience living that way as well, and how that shaped his core values as he has made his own path. And one of the big takeaways was understanding what you say matters, that we should really think about the words that we say, and not only in how we respond, so that we're not responding so quickly and saying things that maybe we will feel bad about later for saying, but also understand our value system. And when we feel we are shifting off of that value system, that sometimes our gut tells us we're shifting away from a value system, but we don't necessarily step back and go, you know what, I just did it. I'm off and I need to pivot back and keep ourselves accountable to the things that we say and we do. And if we do something that inadvertently hurts someone or doesn't support them, that we are owning up to that, that we are coming to that person and talking about it, and then asking how could we do it different next time in order to make sure a situation's better. We also talked about how important honesty is, and understanding the situation that we live in and the situation that somebody else walks in, is that we can never understand the daily life of somebody else. We can only understand it from our perspective, our experience, looking at someone else or hearing what they say, unless we actually put those mindfulness practices in place where we get completely present and allow someone to share their story without us applying our story to it. So as soon as we hear in our mind ourselves applying a story or interrupting them when they're talking to say our own story, we know that we've shifted away from their experience. And I think there was another great pointer from Corliss as well about that it doesn't always have to be a conversation. It can be that you're inviting someone in to just observe a conversation they wouldn't normally be in, or observe a conversation that they've been in, and allow them to tell you what made them uncomfortable, what wasn't inclusive for them, where would they have hit a wall in that conversation or that experience. And that's a great way to learn as well. Now, for Todd, he has really done a lot of work in bringing in inclusiveness and diversity into the Illinois CPA Society, where he understood the fact that it's not just about someone didn't apply, so they're not there. It's about seeking out people so that you can find the people. If they don't see themselves in an organization, they're not necessarily going to apply. But also understanding that if there isn't enough bench strength, that you have to go one step further. And that can be into high schools, that can be into colleges, of exposing people that would never be exposed to certain professions or knowledge bases to what the possibilities are. And when you open up those possibilities, you're allowing people the opportunity to make a decision on their own, whether that's a lifestyle for them that they want or an experience that they want. But if they're never exposed to it, they don't even know it's there, and that opportunity passes by. So that's work that you know that you are not going to get a direct hit on for a while, that it's going to take some time before you see the result of that work. And it's okay that you're not getting an immediate result, which is really hard sometimes in this world that we live in, to go to a place where you're not going to see the immediate result. But you are going to know that you're leaving a legacy, that you are going to know that you are leaving for that next organization. You might not even be there by the time that the work that you've done has made an impact, but it's those little impacts that each of us in our life can make to support one another and understand someone else's experience that can start shifting the world incrementally, little by little. And that leads me to James Leith and my conversation with him that was all about being coachable. That, you know, he shared very vulnerably, you know, some really intense stories about his father, but what those stories did was give him the strength and the grit, you know, internally, that he didn't, you know, no one taught him to do, but he rose above his situation. That, you know, these are challenges that were put in place for him during his lifetime, and rather than sitting there negatively about it, what could he do? And so what he saw that his impact was how he supported other people in so many different ways, and how he learned by shifting his own mindset, how he can help other people to shift their mindset. And he gave a couple of great examples of shifting from being a football player to a cheerleader mascot in college, and how, you know, when an injury happens, and how you can still be a part of something that you love in a different way, and the effect of him being in those roles and how it supported the team and others and inspired others. But how he also used being a mascot, where he could put his head in the huddle and learn how the coaches were changing mindset as well in order to make himself better when he was going to go on to be a coach himself. The other example he had on that, which was great, was being on the volleyball team and being the worst player, but the coach putting him on the team anyways, because the place he had on the team was making the best players better. That it wasn't about him, but the team wasn't as good if he wasn't a part of it. And sometimes we forget that in our roles in our organization, that we can feel like we're a cog in the wheel, but understanding how we support one another is so important, that the team wouldn't be as good if we weren't a part of that team. We don't always have to be the leader, the title of that. Instead, what we can be is a really good support to others. So understanding what those strengths are really important, so that we can feel like we are participating and being a part of things the way that we want. It's always kind of a good exercise to let people know that on your team, that you can do this as an exercise where you send messages to each other and actually tell them, you know, this is where your strengths are and this is how you help me. And that allows each other, it doesn't have to be a performance evaluation or something formal, but really important to allow ourselves that opportunity to tell each other what those strengths are and how we help, so we can keep enhancing those strengths. The other thing that was really important about this conversation, that he applied from a sports point of view, but when you're at practice, it's okay to fail, that you're not supposed to be perfect. Those are the times that we are supposed to try new things and fall on our face. And that's why we practice, which is such a simple thing to think about, but we don't always put it in play. And when he talked about his father going through changing and not wanting to be the bad influence he was, wanting to be a more positive influence in James's life, that James had to go to that theory of that you have to practice and that you're going to fail, and you have to give space to people to fail that are going through change. So all of us are going through change right now, right? There's so much change happening besides whatever would be happening in our lives normally. And we have to give ourselves and the people around us space to fail. That in order to get to our next best self, in order to get to that vision that we have for ourselves, that we're going to have to try some things that we're not necessarily very good at. And in order to do that, we have to give that space of failing, of falling on your face, getting back up, saying what worked, what did work, and what will we do different tomorrow. So whatever didn't work, we're going to let that go. But what did we learn from it so that we can keep getting better? And lastly, my conversation with Erin Lenahan was really a great conversation about supporting one another and how important it is to have a tribe. She was talking about in her career how hard it was to find other people to look up to that were like her. And when we talk about inclusion, it's very important that we see ourselves and other people in order to feel like we are part of an experience. So when we think about how we can support one another, it's really important that we are reaching out, whether it's below us, next to us, above us, of how we create that support system and making sure we network. It doesn't have to be someone immediately in our organization. It could be someone outside of our organization. It can be friends and family, but it's creating that network effect to feel like you're a part of something that's bigger than yourself. And she talked about how she puts this in play by doing this very intentionally, that every week she has a goal for herself of how many meetings she's going to have with people that she works with, people that are outside the organization, people that are outside her department, that she can connect with and have conversations with that aren't necessarily work related, just to make a connection, just to learn more about another person, which really gets us right back to where we started of how important during this quarter has been to have a purpose and vision that's unique to you. So if you can't name that for yourself, maybe take some time after this podcast today and write that down for yourself. Is what's your purpose? What's your passion? What's your vision? Your personal purpose? And how are you supporting other people in your day? Are you more focused on getting your own stuff done, or are there things that you do, whether that's friends, family, people that you work with, to reach out and support one another, and really making a commitment in these times of understanding someone else's experience, giving them the space to educate you, to tell your story, but also for people that are trying to go through change and innovation and maybe changing themselves personally because of the things that they've learned during this time, giving them the space to fail, giving them the space to practice, and that at the end of the day, we are all coachable, and being open for that feedback so that we can always get back to that best next place for ourselves. Thank you for taking the time out of your day to listen to the Breaking Beliefs podcast. I hope you will take a moment to pause before entering back into your day to reflect on this podcast and note 1 to 2 actions you are inspired to do from today's conversation that you could incorporate into your life. To read the full blog and listen back to this episode or any other, you can find them at www.amyvetter.com/Breaking Beliefs podcast and related videos on my YouTube channel. For daily inspiration, follow me on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, and LinkedIn at Amy Vetter CPA. I hope that you will choose to like this and subscribe to this podcast on iTunes, Spotify, and more, so that you can join us for more inspiration on our next episode.